Jake Matthews had it all: wealth, power, and a wedding that was supposed to be the event of the year. But beneath the surface of his picture-perfect life, he harbored a dangerous grudge. Years ago, he had been left behind by the woman he once loved. And now, at the peak of his success, he had a chance to settle the score. His plan: send her an invitation, make sure she saw everything she had lost, let her stand in the shadows while he exchanged vows with a woman who was everything she wasn't. The ultimate payback. But karma has a funny way of flipping the script, because Emily Carter didn't just show up. She arrived with 3 children, triplets, Jake's triplets, and with them, she carried a shocking revelation that turned his grand wedding into an unbelievable disaster. In front of hundreds of guests, the ceremony was stopped. His bride walked out, his carefully crafted revenge shattered into chaos. And just like that, Jake Matthews, the self-made millionaire, the man who thought he had planned for everything, was forced to face the one thing he never saw coming: the truth. How did it all come to this? And what happened after the shocking moment that left everyone speechless? Let's unravel a story so wild, heartbreaking, and full of twists that it feels straight out of a movie. Except this time, it's real. Jake Matthews was a man who had built himself from nothing. He wasn't just a millionaire. He was a force of nature, a tech visionary who had clawed his way to the top with relentless ambition. As the CEO of Zenith Innovations, he had turned his company into an industry giant, dominating AI-driven security systems and reshaping how the world thought about technology. His face was on magazine covers. His opinions were sought after, and his wedding to Olivia Carter, heiress to a powerful real estate dynasty, was set to be the grand event of the year. Everything was in place. Everything was perfect. Except for one thing. No matter how many deals he closed or how many millions he added to his name, one part of his past refused to stay buried. Emily Carter, the woman he had once loved. The woman who had been there before the empire, before the Forbes lists, before the private jets and boardroom battles, the woman he had lost. And yet, Jake had convinced himself that Emily's absence had been a betrayal. She had walked away when he was at his lowest, when his company was nothing more than a struggling startup. She hadn't believed in him, she hadn't stayed. And now, she would see exactly what she had missed out on. That was why he sent her the invitation. It wasn't an olive branch, it wasn't closure. It was a message, a carefully orchestrated move, in a game he thought he had already won. He wanted Emily to see him standing at the altar, exchanging vows with a woman who fit perfectly into the world he had created. A world that no longer had space for her. He wanted her to feel it, to see the life she had given up. To regret ever walking away. If she still had any emotions left for him, this would be the final blow. Olivia, his soon-to-be wife, was the ideal partner for a man like him. Beautiful, polished, connected. She came from old money, knew the ins and outs of high society, and understood that a marriage like theirs was a merger as much as it was a relationship. She never made demands. She never pried into the past. And most importantly, she never asked for more than he was willing to give. To the outside world, their union was flawless. 2 powerful forces combining to form an unstoppable power couple. But deep down, Jake knew something was missing. He told himself that this wasn't personal, that inviting Emily was nothing more than a calculated display of success. But if that were true, why had his hands hesitated over the guest list before sending the invitation? Why did a part of him want to see her face, just to know if she had any regrets? Why did he still think about her at all? But Jake believed in control. He had mastered his emotions long ago. He had spent years turning himself into a man who never looked back. So, as far as he was concerned, this wedding was the ultimate power move, a final statement that he had won. What he didn't know was that Emily had a secret that would turn his entire world upside down. 6 years ago, Jake Matthews stood at a crossroads, one that would shape the rest of his life. On one side was Emily Carter, The woman who had stood by him through his early struggles, who had believed in his vision when it was nothing more than an idea scribbled on napkins. On the other side, Zenith Innovations, his company, his dream, his obsession. In the end, he chose the business. At first, Emily had tried to hold on. She had endured the late nights, the missed dates, the way he would sit across from her at dinner, eyes glued to his laptop. She told herself it was temporary, that once the business took off, he would finally be able to breathe, finally be able to see her again. But Jake was relentless. Every victory only fueled his hunger for more. The more success he tasted, the more distant he became. And then, one night, after yet another broken promise, Emily finally spoke the words she had been dreading. "I can't do this anymore, Jake." He hadn't fought for her, not really. He had given her a half-hearted apology, promised things would change, but when she walked away, he let her go. In his mind, he was making a necessary sacrifice. Love was a luxury for men who weren't trying to build empires. He told himself she would regret it one day, that she would see his name on the front page of business magazines and wonder what could have been. He never once considered that she might have had a secret of her own. What Jake didn't know was that when Emily left, she wasn't alone. A few weeks after the breakup, she had discovered she was pregnant, and not just with one child, with triplets, 3 lives growing inside her, 3 children who would never know their father. The moment she saw the test result, panic gripped her. How could she raise 3 children alone? Should she tell Jake? Would he even care? The answer should have been simple. Of course, she would tell him. He had a right to know, and she had tried. She had sent emails, left voicemails, even showed up at his office once. But every attempt was met with silence. At first, she had thought Jake was ignoring her. Then, after weeks of unanswered messages, she realized the truth. Someone had been intercepting them, that someone was Barbara Hayes, Jake's trusted mentor, his business strategist, the woman who had shaped him into the millionaire he was today. She had decided Emily was a liability. She had deleted emails before Jake could see them, blocked Emily's number, and ensured that any message she sent never reached him. Barbara had erased Emily from Jake's life like a problem that needed to be eliminated. Emily, heartbroken and furious, had been left with no choice. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to chase after a man who clearly didn't want to be found, so she disappeared, moving to a smaller city to raise her children on her own. She had buried the past, convinced herself that Jake was gone forever, until now. Now, 6 years later, Jake had unknowingly extended an invitation back into his life. But this time, Emily wasn't coming alone. This time, he was the one who would have to face the truth. Emily Carter almost didn't open the envelope when she saw Jake Matthews's name on it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid her nail under the flap, pulling out a thick, elegant wedding invitation. Her ex-lover was getting married. The man who had unknowingly left her to raise their 3 children alone was now preparing to say, "I do," to someone else. Her first instinct was to throw it away. Why should she care? Jake had made his choice 6 years ago. He had chosen his business, his ambition, his empire. Everything except her. He had abandoned her, and whether he had known about the pregnancy or not, he had never come looking. So why now? Why this? Why had he invited her to witness what should be the happiest day of his life? She set the invitation on the counter and stared at it, her emotions warring between anger and curiosity. A part of her wanted to ignore it, pretend it never arrived, move on with her life. But then she glanced at the 3 little faces playing in the living room, Liam, Noah, and Ava. Their giggles filled the air as they built towers with their blocks, completely oblivious to the unbelievable twist fate had just thrown their way. The truth was, Emily had never stopped wondering, did Jake ever think about her? Had he ever looked back? Or had she truly been erased from his life the moment she walked away? And if that was the case, then why had he invited her? Was it a cruel joke? A final act of revenge? Her best friend? Natalie had no doubts. "This is classic Jake," she scoffed, rolling her eyes as she sipped her coffee. "You know how he is. He wants you to see how perfect his life is now. He probably thinks you'll show up, realize what you lost and regret everything." Emily swallowed hard. That was the part that got to her. Because Jake had no idea what he had truly lost. He didn't just lose a relationship, he lost a family, 3 children who had his sharp blue eyes, his relentless energy, his ability to command attention without even trying. And suddenly, her decision was made. She wasn't going to the wedding for Jake. She wasn't going for revenge or to stir up wedding drama. She was going because it was time. Her children deserved to know the truth. She had spent years protecting them from the past, but she couldn't hide forever. Jake needed to know. So, she booked the flights, she packed their bags, and as the plane took off, she glanced out the window, her heart pounding with anticipation. Jake Matthews had invited her into his world again, but he had no idea that she was about to change it forever. Barbara Hayes had spent years shaping Jake Matthews into a powerhouse. She had been there when he was a struggling entrepreneur with nothing but a dream, guiding him through ruthless decisions, high-stakes deals, and the sacrifices that came with success. But there was one lesson she had always drilled into him above all else. Attachments make you weak, and Emily Carter, she had been the biggest attachment of all. 6 years ago, Barbara had made a choice. A choice that Jake would only now uncover. When Emily had tried to tell Jake about her pregnancy, Barbara had intercepted everything. She had seen the emails, heard the voicemails, and deleted them without a second thought. She had told Jake's assistant that Emily was a distraction, had blocked her number, and ensured that her messages never reached him. In her mind, she was protecting him. She had seen what love did to powerful men. It made them hesitate. It made them soft. And Jake Matthews had been too important, too brilliant, too destined for greatness to be sidetracked by a relationship that would only hold him back. Barbara had built an empire beside him, and she wasn't about to let it crumble because of a woman with a baby, but she had underestimated something. Emily wasn't gone. And now, as she stepped into Jake's wedding, holding the hands of 3 children who bore his unmistakable features, Barbara knew that her carefully crafted illusion was about to shatter. The moment Jake saw them, everything changed. His confident, self-assured stance wavered. His sharp blue eyes darted from Emily's face to the children standing beside her. The air in the grand wedding hall shifted, whispers rippling through the crowd. The wedding had officially turned into chaos. Olivia, the bride, sensed it immediately. "Jake," she whispered, gripping his arm tightly, her voice edged with something between panic and rage. "Who are they?" Jake's jaw clenched, his mind racing. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But then Emily spoke, her voice cutting through the thick tension like a blade. "I tried to tell you, Jake, but Barbara made sure you never heard me." A gasp rippled through the guests. The betrayal hit like a wrecking ball. Jake turned to Barbara, his mentor, his most trusted confidant, the woman who had helped him build everything. "Tell me she's lying," he said, his voice low. "Dangerous," but Barbara didn't flinch. "I did what was necessary," she replied smoothly. "For you, for your future." But Jake wasn't buying it. And for the first time in his life, he realized that the person he had trusted the most had stolen the most important thing from him, his family. For a long moment, no one moved. The air inside the grand wedding hall was thick with tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe. Hundreds of guests sat frozen in their seats, whispering amongst themselves, exchanging wide-eyed glances as they processed what had just happened. Jake Matthews, the self-made millionaire, the man who controlled everything, had just lost control of the most important day of his life. Jake's mind was in free fall. His gaze flickered between Emily and the 3 children standing beside her, children who looked like miniature versions of himself, his sharp features, his blue eyes, his defiant stance. It was undeniable. They were his. And yet, he had never even known they existed. His bride-to-be, Olivia, felt the shift immediately. The perfect world she had built in her mind, the high society marriage, the luxury, the power was crumbling before her eyes. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into Jake's arm. "Jake," she said, her voice low and trembling, "tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you didn't know about this." Jake swallowed hard. He didn't have an answer, because the truth was worse than anything Olivia could have imagined. He hadn't known, but he should have. Olivia's eyes darkened. She had spent years molding herself into the perfect wife for a man like Jake, turning a blind eye to things that didn't concern her, accepting that his heart would always belong to his work. But this was beyond anything she had prepared for. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, the whispers turning into a dull roar. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. This was a scandal, a public reckoning, a story that would spread like wildfire. And then Olivia did something no one saw coming. She took a deep breath, her face unreadable. Then, in one calm, deliberate motion, she slipped the engagement ring off her finger and dropped it onto the marble floor. The sharp clink echoed through the silent hall. "I refuse to be someone's revenge story," she said, her voice steady but cold. "You never loved me, Jake. You just wanted to prove something. And now you've lost everything." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a stunned audience and a man who had just watched his perfectly crafted life collapse in real time. But the real shock came next, because as Olivia disappeared through the grand doors, one of the triplets, Ava, took a step forward. She tugged at Emily's dress, looking up at her mother with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy," she whispered, pointing at Jake. "Is that our daddy?" The room fell dead silent. All eyes were on Jake. This wasn't just an awkward wedding interruption. This was the end of everything he thought he knew. Jake's breath caught in his throat. His entire life had been built around control, power, and certainty. But as he stared at the children he had never met, the ones he had unknowingly abandoned, he realized that for the first time in his life, he had no idea what to do. And suddenly, it wasn't just his wedding that was over. It was the life he had built, the one that had never included them. Jake Matthews had faced high-stakes negotiations, billion-dollar deals, and cutthroat business rivals. But nothing had ever shaken him like this. His wedding was in ruins, his fiancée had walked out, his mentor had betrayed him, and standing before him were 3 children, his children, who had just unraveled the life he thought he had built. Emily stood her ground, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had spent 6 years preparing for this moment, imagining what she would say if she ever saw Jake again. But now that she was here, face to face with the man who had unknowingly left her to raise 3 children alone, she felt something unexpected. Exhaustion. She had carried this burden for too long. Jake turned to Barbara, his once trusted advisor, his voice dangerously low. "You kept this from me." He was still trying to wrap his head around it. 6 years, 6 entire years of his children's lives, gone. And for what? Because Barbara had decided he didn't need a family. Barbara didn't even flinch. "I did what was necessary," she said, as if it were a business deal gone cold. "You wouldn't be where you are today if you had been distracted by my own children." Jake cut her off, his voice sharp with disbelief. Barbara had no answer, and in that moment, Jake saw her for who she really was. Not a mentor, not a protector, but a woman who had played God with his life, cutting off anything she deemed unworthy, and he had let her. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but anger wouldn't fix this. He turned back to Emily, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Why didn't you try harder to reach me?" It was a pathetic question. And he knew it the second it left his mouth. Emily let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "Try harder. You think I didn't try? I emailed, I called, I showed up at your office." Her eyes burned with emotion now. "I begged, Jake, and every time I was met with silence." The words hit like a slap. She had fought for him, and he had never known. His gaze drifted to the triplets. Liam stood stiffly beside Emily, his small face unreadable, but his eyes calculating, just like Jake's. Noah, quieter, more cautious, hovered behind his mother, unwilling to step forward. But Ava, the boldest of the three, was still looking up at him. Her little hand clutching Emily's dress. Jake swallowed. "Ava," he said her name for the first time, and she tilted her head, curious. Noah, finally speaking, looked at Emily and asked, "Is he going to leave again?" Jake felt his heart stop. This was more than a shocking revelation. It was more than a wedding disaster. This was the moment he realized he had lost something that money, power, and success could never get back: time. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fight for what was left. For the first time in his life, Jake Matthews didn't have a plan. He had built an empire through ruthless strategy and relentless ambition, always knowing his next move before anyone else. But standing in front of his 3 children, his triplets, who barely knew his name, there was no playbook for this. Emily had made it clear from the start. She wasn't going to just let him walk in and claim the role of dad. He had lost 6 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, birthdays, and first words. He wasn't going to waltz back in and pretend like nothing had happened. If he wanted to be in their lives, he would have to prove it. At first, Liam kept his distance. He was the most skeptical, the most guarded. He watched Jake carefully, analyzing him the way Jake himself would study a potential business rival. Noah was more reserved, never saying much but always listening. And Ava, she was the only one who immediately wanted to give him a chance. She was the first to take his hand, the first to ask him questions, the first to laugh when he awkwardly stumbled through a bedtime story. Jake had spent his life closing billion-dollar deals, but nothing had ever felt as difficult as trying to win over his own children. Emily wasn't making it easy either, and she shouldn't. She had spent years raising them alone, carrying a burden he hadn't even known existed. Jake respected that now. More than that, he admired her for it. She had built a life for their children without him, given them love, security, everything they needed. If she was hesitant about letting him in, he had to earn that trust too. So he did something no one expected. He stopped working late. He stepped away from business deals. He showed up consistently. School drop-offs, soccer games, helping with homework. He was there not just when it was convenient, not just when it was easy, but every single time. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Noah finally spoke up. "Are you staying this time?" His voice was small, hesitant. Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "I'm staying." Emily watched this unfold, arms crossed. Arms. Her eyes filled with something Jake couldn't quite read. She wanted to believe him, but could she? Could she really trust the man who had once walked away? Even if it hadn't been his fault, Jake knew he wasn't just fighting for his children. He was fighting for her too. But was he already too late? The fallout from the wedding disaster didn't just shake Jake's personal life. It rippled through his entire empire. The media went wild. Tabloids plastered his face on every front page with headlines like "Millionaire CEO's wedding ends in chaos as ex-lover crashes with secret triplets." Investors started whispering. Stockholders demanded explanations. His PR team scrambled to control the damage, but the real reckoning, it came in the boardroom. Barbara Hayes, once his most trusted advisor, was at the center of it all. The woman who had guided him through billion-dollar deals, who had shaped him into the relentless businessman he was today, had also been the one who had robbed him of 6 years with his children. And when the truth about her deception came to light, the consequences were swift. Jake walked into the board meeting that morning, a different man. He wasn't there to save Barbara. He was there to end her reign. He laid out the facts. Emails, deleted messages, phone records, everything Emily had told him. He had verified, and now he wasn't asking for explanations. He was demanding accountability. Barbara sat stiffly across from him, unreadable as ever. "Everything I did was for your success," she said coolly. "Without me, you wouldn't be here." Jake's expression didn't waver. "And without you, I would have had a family." His voice was steady, but the weight behind his words was undeniable. The board voted unanimously. Barbara was out. Her fall from grace was instant. The same woman who had once commanded power over every major decision in Jake's company was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. Some executives whispered about how fast it had all unraveled, how a woman who had once seemed untouchable had lost everything in a single night. And yet, the real transformation wasn't Barbara's downfall, it was Jake's. For the first time in his life, he took a step back. He reassessed what he had built, what he had sacrificed, and what it had cost him. He had spent years believing that work came first, that success required unwavering focus and brutal decision-making. But now, he understood that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. So, he made a decision no one saw coming. He restructured his company, he delegated power, stepped away from micromanaging and, most shockingly, he took time off. Not for an acquisition, not for a merger, but for his children. At first, people doubted him. They whispered that he was losing his edge, but then something unexpected happened. His company thrived. His employees worked harder. His leadership team stepped up, because when Jake Matthews finally chose to prioritize what truly mattered, everything else fell into place. Jake Matthews had spent most of his life chasing success, chasing power, chasing something just out of reach. But for the first time, he wasn't looking ahead. He was looking around him, at his children, at Emily, at the life he almost lost. Rebuilding his relationship with Liam, Noah and Ava wasn't easy. Trust wasn't automatic. Time alone wouldn't fix what had been broken. He had to show up again and again until they believed he wasn't going anywhere. Liam, the oldest, the most guarded, tested him the hardest. He would watch Jake with suspicion, measuring every promise, waiting for him to fail. "You're not like other dads," he had once said flatly. It wasn't a compliment, it was a challenge. "Prove me wrong, Noah." The quiet observer kept his distance. He wasn't hostile, but he wasn't open either. It was as if he was waiting to see if this new version of Jake was real or just temporary. Ava, the one who had always been the most open-hearted, was the first to trust him. She would take his hand without hesitation, would excitedly tell him about her day, would treat him like he had always been there, even when he hadn't. Jake knew that love couldn't be forced, but it could be earned, and so he kept showing up, at school pickups, at soccer games, at bedtime. Emily, too, was hesitant. She had spent years raising their children alone, learning how to live without him. She wasn't sure if Jake's transformation was real or temporary, if she let him in again, if she let herself believe. Would he walk away all over again? She wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet, maybe not ever, but she was willing to give him a chance. One night after a long day, Emily found herself watching Jake as he read to the triplets. His voice was steady, softer than it used to be. The kids were curled up beside him, leaning into him like he had been there forever, like they finally believed he wasn't going anywhere. And Emily realized something. She had spent 6 years thinking Jake had abandoned them, but the truth was he had been robbed of his chance to choose. And now, given that choice, he was choosing them. Maybe it wasn't about rewriting the past. Maybe it was about building a future. And for the first time in a long time, Emily was willing to see where that future led. Life has a way of bringing back the things we try to leave behind. Jake Matthews thought he had won the game, built his empire, secured his future, and moved on from his past. But the past doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It waits, it lingers, and one day, it demands to be faced. This story isn't just about a ruined wedding. It's about choices, consequences, and second chances. It's about how success means nothing if you build it on a foundation of regret. Jake lost 6 years of his children's lives, 6 years of first steps, first words, first laughs, and why? Because someone decided that family was a weakness. But here's the thing. Family is never a weakness. Jake had to lose everything before he understood what truly mattered. He had to let go of his need for control. his hunger for revenge, his obsession with proving himself, because in the end, success is empty when you have no one to share it with. Now ask yourself, what have you been chasing? What have you left behind? Are there people in your life who deserve a second chance, or are you the one who needs to step up before it's too late? Because if Jake's story proves anything, it's that karma never forgets, and sometimes life gives you a chance to make things right. If you're brave enough to take it, what would you have done in Jake's place? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you love stories with shocking twists and life-changing lessons, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.